Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm excited today to talk about Cisco Nexus Dashboard. So in our last session, we briefly talked about the data center and the use of Cisco Nexus Dashboard. So we will continue to build from where we left off. And if you quickly recall, I'm not going to spend time, we were talking about the Cisco Nexus Dashboard or Cisco Nexus Dashboard Fabric Controller. And we quickly hinted or discussed very briefly that Cisco had released a newer version of the Cisco Nexus Dashboard, and the version is release 4.1. And as we go in this series, we'll go ahead and explore quite a bit of a lot more. So I'm looking at another public Cisco documentation, and again, I encourage you to go ahead and take a look at it. It's a very good documentation out there. So we quickly talked about Nexus Dashboard. And if I quickly scroll down, this is what we had kind of looked up at a pretty high level. You can configure things, you can manage, but you can analyze the things. And you could see very well with the help of the Nexus Dashboard, we can go ahead and start configuring the AI/ML fabric. So we'll go ahead and take a look at it. So the Cisco Nexus Dashboard, and now we are talking about the release version 4.1. It talks about being unified. So what does the unified really indicates? If you have worked on the previous version, the Nexus Dashboard had an offering of a LAN and SAN. That was one product. There is another product which is known as Cisco Insights, or known as an NDI. And then there was another application, a Cisco Orchestrator. So now Cisco has combined all of these three functionalities under a single umbrella, and that is what is known as unified services on the Cisco Nexus Dashboard. So you have the, again, visibility with the help of Insights. You have the orchestration piece which comes from Orchestrator, and you have the Fabric Controller piece, that is the automation. And again, the Fabric Controller does both the LAN side as well as the SAN side. And again, this is a pretty good documentation, so go ahead and read it. I'll highlight a few things pretty quickly for our discussion. In terms of the platform support, so Cisco Nexus Dashboard can be deployed either on Cisco UCS boxes, which are either M6 or M8. And because now the Nexus Dashboard is deployed as a bare metal on top of these UCS boxes, this type of deployment is simply known as Physical Nexus Dashboard deployment. And a lot of people just call them in short as a PND. That means it is a Nexus Dashboard which is installed physically on one of the Cisco UCS boxes, either M6 or M8. At the same time, Nexus Dashboard is also supported as a virtual appliance. That means it's known as VND. That means you can go ahead and deploy the Nexus Dashboard on many virtual platforms which are out there, like KVM. You can go ahead and make use of the ESXi. There are many more platforms like on AWS. So you can go ahead and deploy the Nexus Dashboard in any of these platforms. And again, you would get the same capability regardless whether you are running on physical or virtual. The only difference is I noticed, and we'll go over, it's primarily around the scaling capability of the one versus the other. You can take a look at the UI experience. So now another thing I want to highlight is multi-cluster support. That means with Nexus Dashboard, operators seamlessly consume services that have access through a single portal. That means, let's say if you have 2 Nexus Dashboard running or 3 Nexus Dashboard installation in your environment, and now you, instead of logging to each one and managing, you could go ahead and configure something called federation, and that's called your multi-cluster. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that. Just like any other product, it has a pretty rich backup and restore capability, RBAC, multi-cluster connectivity. Another good thing about the Nexus Dashboard, you can go ahead and connect your Nexus Dashboard to a Cisco ACI APIC controller, and it will give you a single, pane of glass. These are some of the automation and management features. This is what we had quickly touched base previously also. So you can go ahead and create VXLAN based fabrics, classic layer 2, layer 3, AI/ML fabrics, and we'll go ahead and take a look at or maybe your enhanced classic LAN-based fabric. Now, we quickly hinted in the last session also that the Nexus dashboard, we would primarily be working with the Cisco Nexus devices. So when you have Nexus devices in your environment, a Nexus device, if you're familiar with like Cisco ACI or any other technology, your switches, here again, the switches that I'm referring is primarily the Nexus 9000. A switch, depending on its functionality and where it's being used, it can have different roles. So a switch could just simply be a spine layer. That means you are primarily just using it to quickly route or forward the packets between one or more leaves. A switch could have a role of a leaf. That means this is the switch where you can go ahead and connect your end devices like your servers or your other high-end storage and other things. A switch could also have a role of like a border, as the name says, the border. And there are many more. Don't worry, I'll go ahead and go into detail of all of these things as we further progress in the series. It does quite a lot of other things, like you can have a power on auto provisioning if you're familiar with the process like ZTP or PNP. So this is similar to that one on the Nexus devices. You will have a unified topology, views and control. And again, yes, you can go ahead and take a look at it. There's quite a few things. There's a micro-segmentation support. There is L4 to L7 services. That means you can go ahead and connect with your firewalls and other devices. There is a change control piece also built into the product. There is software management. That means you can go ahead and upgrade the software on your devices. You can install some patches and other capabilities or the RPMs. There is a Git repository integration. Again, I kind of hinted earlier that Nexus platform, but it also supports the IOXC and iOS XR, and these are the various information which are listed out over here. Now, if I quickly scroll down again, this is what we had talked about being unified. There is orchestration capability. We'll go ahead and take a look at, there are different application templates. There are provisioning policies over here. Endpoint security groups, different capabilities, and there is like anomalies. There is anomaly correlation. There is an assurance piece. There is a traffic analytics. All of these things are related with on the monitoring side of the capability of the product. So before we go ahead and start doing a deep dive or start deploying, and obviously you can go ahead and read this data sheet. It's very good actually. Now, if you're trying to deploy on a physical, these are the spec of a physical server. That's the product ID if you like to order one of the physical servers. And if I go ahead and quickly scroll down, and this kind of lets the supported hypervisor if you're trying to deploy as a vSide. And these are the various integration that Nexus Dashboard as a product is allowing. You can go ahead and integrate ServiceNow, Splunk. So yeah, there is quite a lot of useful information on this one. And before we can go ahead and start experimenting with some of this information, we need to understand there are a few other things. So for our discussion, I'll keep it right now around the VND, and we'll go ahead and explore a PND, but let's quickly talk about the virtual Nexus dashboard. So that means you would be deploying this on a hypervisor, as we saw in the previous page. These are various hypervisors that are supported. So that means we would be deploying a virtual machine. Now, when you deploy a virtual machine, I'm sure you have an experience of deploying a virtual machine somewhere else too. So a virtual machine would need what? A certain number of CPUs, certain amount of memory, and there is a disk, one or more NIC cards. So just to take it slightly back, a Nexus dashboard is an application that you can deploy on a single node. So now that single node could be virtual or a physical, or you can have a 3-node cluster. Obviously, if you're trying in your lab or very small environment with few switches, you can go around with one node deployment. But if you're looking at few hundreds of devices, maybe in that case it is better to go with a 3-node or a 6-node cluster deployment. So as with any virtual machine, there are one important thing that you need to keep in mind, that these VMs, regardless a single node or a multi-node cluster, Each VM would need at least 2 physical NIC cards, or will have 2 virtual NIC cards in case of it's a VND. One of the NIC card we will be designating as a management NIC card. As the name says management, that means you would be using this NIC primarily for the management piece of the product, like doing an SSH to your instance, or maybe accessing the web UI of your Nexus dashboard. The another interface on your VM is called or known as your data interface or the data NIC. And this is the NIC that we would primarily be utilizing for the communication between the Nexus dashboard and our devices. And again, don't worry, I'll go ahead and repeat that as we come back and start deploying things. But remember so far that whenever you are deploying either a single node or a multi-node cluster, it needs to have 2 NIC, a management NIC and a data NIC. In case of a 3-node cluster, you will have 3 nodes. Each node will have a management IP, a NIC, and a data IP, a data NIC. Now, another thing that I want to highlight over here is the Nexus dashboard can be deployed in either a layer 2 deployment or a layer 3 deployment. Layer 2 deployment, that means you could have all the 3 instances within a single subnet, and that's how things can communicate. That means you are using the same L2 for management and another L2 for your data NIC. Or you could also go ahead and deploy the Nexus dashboard in a layer 3 deployment mode. That means each of your node is sitting in a different management and a data subnet. But then how would they communicate in the case of a layer 3? So for the case of layer 3, we would also go ahead and start making use of the BGP. And using with the BGP routing, we will go ahead and start exchanging the prefixes, the subnet information between each of your ND nodes, and that's how they will be able to communicate. Apart from the management IP address and data IP addresses, now as we just keep in mind that for our discussion, let's assume your devices would communicate to your Nexus dashboard over the data IP address of your Nexus dashboard. Now on your devices, again, the device we are talking here is Nexus 9000. On the Nexus 9000, you have a dedicated management port, which a lot of you might have seen denoted as an MGMT port. It's usually on the back of the switch. It's usually located on the supervisor side of the module. If you are using that port to communicate from the switch back to the Nexus dashboard's data interface, that kind of a communication is called your out-of-band communication. Because from the switch perspective, you are using the management 0 port, which is also known as the out-of-band management port. There is another type of a connectivity. If you are using any of your switch front panel ports, which are typically named as like Ethernet ports or the gigabit Ethernet ports, if you end up using one of that port to connect or to communicate back to the data interface of your Nexus dashboard, that kind of communication is known as your in-band management or in-band communication. To utilize most of the capabilities of the product, it is better to go with the in-band management. But for some reason, if you don't have in-band management, you can also work with the out-of-band management to manage the device. And as we explore for like your insight capabilities and monitoring, we can go ahead and make use of the in-band with the help of like routings and other means to reach that particular piece. So quickly going back to the 4.1 release, your docs actually here. It talks about these different things. That's what we have discussed. A unified deployment, as it says, the previous release, we talked about, we had different products. Now Cisco had combined all of these products, your collection, controller, orchestrator, and telemetry into a single product, which is known as Nexus Dashboard Release 4.1. Again, we quickly talked about you can deploy it on a hardware like a UCS, or you can deploy it as a virtual machine. These are the different form factors. There is one thing that I want to highlight in this page and this particular line, the virtual form factor. As we discussed, you can go ahead and deploy an Nexus dashboard either on ESXi or the KVM. When you are creating the virtual machine, there are two profiles or two flavors of that one. There is something called as data node and there is something called as an app node. Data node, this profile with the higher system requirements, is designed for higher scale and on unified deployment. That means if you want a single node with all of the capabilities of controller, telemetry, as well as an orchestration, we would need our virtual machine to be of type data. There is another type of profile or spec which is known as your app node. As it says, this profile with lower system requirement can be deployed as secondary nodes. So what are we talking here? The secondary nodes. In this case, the secondary node refers to like is a worker node. If you're familiar with the Kubernetes concept, we have your primary nodes, or some folks call them the master node. They are technically your hybrid or 3 primary nodes followed by 1 or more secondary nodes. Can also be deployed as primary node but does not support unified deployment. That means you can have app node as a primary node also, but then you cannot run all of these 3 products, your controller, your telemetry and orchestration, on this kind of a deployment. If you ends up using your app node as your primary node, that means you can only make use of the controller functionalities and not the telemetry and or the orchestration capability. So keep that in mind. We had quickly touched base on this one. So a cluster can be of a single node or a 3 primary nodes. And you can have up to 3 additional secondary nodes. That means you can have a single node deployment, you can have a 3 node deployment, and you can have a 6 node deployment actually. And depending on the scale and size, again, go back and take a look at these scaling guidelines, how big of a thing that you are trying to deploy. Controller again refers to simply the fabric management. That means you are primarily dealing with the NXOS and non-NXOS switches, and you are trying to do either a LAN fabric or a SAN fabric. Telemetry functionality, as the name says, insights. That means you are collecting the telemetry data and you are trying to create some insights with that one. Orchestration, if you want to connect multiple Nexus Dashboard deployment or clusters together and you want to go ahead and orchestrate a common thing across all of those, as well as you can go ahead and make use of the orchestrator for the ACI piece too. So when all of these 3 functionalities are installed together, that is when it is known as your unified deployment. Otherwise, it is not a unified deployment. And I would highly encourage for you to go ahead and read. These Cisco docs are wonderful. All credit goes to Cisco. I'm just referencing their public documentation for our knowledge and sharing here. It would be good before the next session if you can quickly go ahead and maybe take a look at deploying in Linux KVM, and that is where we will go ahead and start doing the deployment of Cisco Nexus Dashboard in our next episode. That'll be all for today. Thanks for joining. I will see you in the next episode. Thank you.